The impossible signal. The distress signal had been repeating for 7 days when Ambassador Korthax finally admitted defeat. The crystalline being stood before the Galactic Assembly, his translucent form dimming with each word he spoke. The Zalarian Defense Fleet, over 400 vessels carrying nearly 20,000 souls from 12 different species, remained trapped in the void sector, a region of space where physics itself seemed to rebel against reason. No rescue mission had succeeded. The most advanced ships in the galaxy, vessels that could traverse wormholes and bend space-time, had all failed. The void sector consumed them like a cosmic whirlpool, its anomalous gravitational fields and radiation storms overwhelming even the most sophisticated shielding systems. 3 rescue attempts had already been lost, adding another 8 ships to the graveyard that the void had become. Commander Elena Rodriguez watched the proceedings from Earth's observation booth, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. Beside her, Chief Engineer Marcus Thompson scribbled notes on an actual paper pad, a sight that would have amused the other species present if they weren't facing such a crisis. The humans had only been part of the Galactic Assembly for 5 years, barely newcomers by cosmic standards. Yet Elena saw something in this situation that the others missed. The Zalarian fleet had entered the void sector pursuing raiders who had stolen critical medical supplies meant for plague-stricken colonies. Their noble mission had become their doom when a massive stellar eruption created a cascading failure in the sector's already unstable quantum fields. Now they drifted, power failing, life support systems operating on emergency reserves that would last perhaps another 10 days at most. Ambassador Korthax's final words echoed through the assembly chamber. We must accept that the Zalarian defense fleet is lost. No technology exists that can penetrate the void sector's defenses and return intact. Elena stood up. The motion drew every eye in the vast chamber, hundreds of alien delegates turning to observe the human representative. She was small by galactic standards, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform notably lacking the elaborate decorations favored by other species. Yet something in her bearing commanded attention. Earth requests permission to attempt a rescue, she said simply. The chamber erupted in a mixture of sounds that the universal translators struggled to convert. Disbelief, skepticism, even what might have been laughter from the methane-breathing Golgorians. The Primarch, an ancient being whose species had achieved spaceflight before Earth's sun had even formed, raised a tendril for silence. Commander Rodriguez, the Primarch's voice resonated like a deep bell. Humanity's enthusiasm is admirable, but your species has barely mastered quantum drive technology. The void sector has claimed ships with capabilities far beyond your current level. Elena smiled, the expression puzzling many of the assembled aliens who couldn't read human facial expressions. With respect, Primarch, that's exactly why we might succeed. We haven't mastered quantum drives. Half our fleet still runs on fusion reactors and chemical rockets. We use manual controls alongside our computers. We navigate with star charts printed on plastic sheets as backups to our navigation systems. Marcus stepped forward, his engineer's excitement barely contained. The void sector disrupts advanced technology, right? Quantum entanglement fails. Artificial intelligence systems crash. Gravitational manipulators implode. But what about technology that doesn't rely on quantum mechanics? What about good old-fashioned combustion engines and mechanical systems? The assembly fell silent. The concept was so primitive, so backwards that none had considered it. The Vorthon delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a mechanical shell, flickered in what might have been amusement. You propose to enter the most dangerous region of known space with primitive technology? This is suicide. No, Elena replied firmly. This is human engineering. We call it redundancy through diversity. Every human ship is required to maintain multiple backup systems, including purely mechanical ones. It's a holdover from our early space exploration, when a computer failure meant death. We never stopped building ships that could be operated manually if needed. She gestured to the holographic display showing Earth's assembled rescue fleet. The ships were not sleek or beautiful like the crystalline vessels of the Zalarians or the bioorganic craft of the Netherians. They looked cobbled together, industrial, almost crude. Solar panels jutted from their hulls alongside nuclear reactors. Chemical thrusters sat next to ion drives. Mechanical airlock systems were visible next to quantum field generators. The Magellan, Elena pointed to the lead vessel, carries 3 separate navigation systems. Quantum positioning, yes, but also inertial guidance using gyroscopes and even an optical telescope array for stellar navigation. Her hull is layered steel and ceramic, not energy shields. Primitive by your standards. But the void sector can't disrupt what doesn't rely on quantum effects. The debate raged for hours. Many delegates argued it was throwing human lives away uselessly. Others worried about the political implications if humanity's primitive approach succeeded, where advanced civilizations had failed. But as the chronometer ticked away the Zalarian fleet's remaining hours, pragmatism won. The vote was close, but Earth received permission to attempt the rescue. 48 hours later, Captain Diana Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Magellan, surrounded by a mixture of cutting-edge holographic displays and analog instruments that belonged in a museum. Her crew of 300 represented humanity's finest, not because they were the most educated in quantum mechanics or exotic physics, but because they were mechanics, engineers and problem solvers who could repair a life support system with spare parts and determination. The fleet assembled around them was humanity's confession of technological inadequacy and stubborn pride rolled into one. The Perseverance bristled with communication arrays operating on every frequency from radio waves to quantum entanglement. The Pioneer carried massive chemical fuel tanks that other species had abandoned centuries ago. The Endurance had been retrofitted with manual controls for every critical system, switches and levers that would function even if every computer on board failed. "All stations report ready," Lieutenant James Park announced, reading from both a holographic display and a paper checklist. It was this redundancy that defined the human approach. They trusted nothing completely, always maintaining a backup, then a backup to the backup. Diana opened a channel to the entire fleet. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're about to attempt has been called impossible by species that have forgotten what that word really means. They see our mechanical airlocks and chemical rockets as primitive. They're right, but primitive doesn't mean ineffective. A hammer is primitive compared to a quantum manipulator, but when you need to break something, the hammer still works." She paused, looking at the swirling maelstrom of the void sector on the main display. It was beautiful in its violence, streams of exotic radiation painting space in colors that shouldn't exist. The Zalarian fleet took a stand against pirates to save plague victims. They put themselves at risk for strangers. That's the kind of courage that transcends species, that speaks to something fundamental about sapient life. We're going to bring them home, not with the most advanced technology, but with determination, creativity, and yes, with engines that burn rocket fuel and computers that use silicon chips. We're going to show the galaxy that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The crew cheered, a distinctly human sound that echoed through the ships. As the fleet began its approach to the void sector, warning signals flashed on every advanced system. Quantum drives showed massive interference. Shield generators fluctuated wildly. Navigation computers threw error messages, but the mechanical systems, the chemical thrusters, the analog instruments, they remained steady. The human fleet pushed forward into the storm, carrying 400 years of spaceflight heritage that had never quite let go of the idea that sometimes simpler was better. Against all odds, the void sector welcomed the human fleet with violence that defied description. Space itself seemed to writhe and twist, gravitational waves visible as distortions that bent starlight into impossible spirals. The Magellan shuddered as Diana Okonkwo watched her quantum systems fail one by one, exactly as predicted. But the mechanical gyroscopes kept spinning, the chemical thrusters kept burning, and the analog navigation systems kept tracking their position using nothing more sophisticated than triangulation from known pulsars. "Quantum drive is completely offline," Lieutenant Park reported, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. "Switching to chemical propulsion, navigation transferring to optical tracking." Around them, the human fleet transformed from modern starships into something their ancestors would have recognized. Pilots grabbed physical control sticks, engineers read mechanical pressure gauges, and navigators plotted courses on paper charts. It was space travel stripped to its essential core, humans and machines working in harmony without the mediation of quantum processors or artificial intelligence. The first 12 hours were hellish. The void sector tested every system, every backup, every contingency the humans had planned. The Pioneer lost 2 quantum sensors before switching entirely to radar and LiDAR. The Perseverance had to vent 3 compartments when exotic radiation overwhelmed their energy shields. But the mechanical blast doors held firm. The Endurance navigated through a gravitational anomaly, using nothing but visual observation and mathematical calculations done by hand. Then through the cosmic storm they detected the Zalarian fleet. The sight took Diana's breath away. 400 ships hung in space like frozen sculptures, their elegant crystalline hulls dark and lifeless. No lights, no energy signatures, no signs of activity. They had arranged themselves in a defensive sphere, smaller vessels protected by the larger ones. A last act of defiance against the void that had claimed them. Life signs are weak but present, Chief Medical Officer Yuki Tanaka reported, reading from a simple infrared scanner that predated humanity's first contact with alien life. They've gone into hibernation mode. Internal temperature is dropping. We have maybe 30 hours before permanent damage. Diana studied the situation. The Zalarian ships were dead in space, their quantum cores completely drained by the void's interference. Even if they could somehow restore power, the ship's navigation systems would never function in this environment. They needed a solution that no advanced species would consider, something so primitive it was brilliant. Marcus, she called the chief engineer. How much cable do we have? Marcus Thompson's eyes widened as he understood. You want to tow them out? All 400 ships? Not tow, Diana corrected, a plan forming in her mind that would have seemed insane to any sensible species. We're going to create a chain. Physical connections between every ship, human and Zalarian. We'll link the entire fleet into one massive construct and push our way out together. The engineering challenge was staggering. In the chaos of the void sector, with radiation that could cook an unprotected human in seconds, they had to physically connect 400 alien vessels to their 40 human ships. It required spacewalks in conditions that defied safety protocols, using magnetic grapples and steel cables that other species had abandoned centuries ago. But humans had one advantage the galaxy had forgotten. They were still comfortable with physical labor, with getting their hands dirty, with solving problems through sweat and determination rather than elegant technology. Teams of engineers in reinforced mechanical suits, the kind that operated on hydraulics and manual controls rather than powered armor fields, ventured into the storm. The work was brutal. Engineer Sandra Cole nearly died when a radiation burst overloaded her suit's life support, saved only by her partner manually pumping oxygen through a backup valve. Pilot Chen Wei had to fly his shuttle using visual navigation alone, threading between gravitational anomalies that would have crushed him if he'd been off by even a meter. Mechanic Robert Okafor repaired a critical coupling using an actual welding torch, the ancient tool working where quantum fuses had failed. 20 hours into the operation, they had connected half the fleet. The human ships were arranged strategically throughout the chain, their chemical engines positioned to push the entire mass. It was an ugly solution, a configuration that looked like a child's toy rather than a rescue operation, but it was working. Then the void sector struck back. A massive gravitational wave, larger than anything they'd encountered, rolled through space toward them. Diana watched it approach on the mechanical sensors, a wall of distorted space-time that would scatter the fleet like leaves if it hit them in their current formation. All ships, Emergency Protocol 7, Diana commanded. It was a maneuver they'd only theorized, never tested. Every human ship fired their chemical thrusters simultaneously, but not to move forward. Instead, they created a spin, rotating the entire connected fleet like a massive wheel in space. The gravitational wave hit them while they were rotating. Instead of tearing the fleet apart, the rotational momentum distributed the stress across all the connections. Cables strained and groaned, some snapping under the pressure, but the redundant connections held. The fleet rode the wave like a surfer, using its energy to actually push them toward the edge of the void sector. "It's working," Park shouted over the noise of stressed metal and warning klaxons. "We're moving. We're actually moving." The next 8 hours were a blur of constant adjustment and repair. Engineers raced to replace broken cables. Pilots fired thrusters and precisely calculated burns to maintain the spin. Navigators plotted their course using nothing but mathematics and observation. It was spaceflight at its most fundamental, humans proving that sophistication wasn't always superior to determination. As they approached the edge of the void sector, something remarkable happened. The Zalarian ships began to show signs of life. Away from the worst of the interference, their emergency power systems started to reactivate. Commander Thylos, the Zalarian fleet admiral, managed to establish communication using a simple radio frequency, technology his species hadn't used in millennia. Human vessels. His translated voice was weak but filled with emotion. We are detecting your presence through physical vibrations in our hull. This is impossible. You cannot be here. Commander Thylos, Diana responded, unable to suppress a grin. Humanity specializes in the impossible. Hold tight, we're almost home. The final push required everything they had. Every human ship burned through their chemical fuel reserves, some literally running on fumes. The Perseverance suffered a catastrophic engine failure and had to be pushed by 2 other ships. The Pioneer's navigation system finally gave out entirely, forcing them to steer by having crew members look out actual windows and shout course corrections. But they made it. As they crossed the threshold of the void sector, emerging into normal space, the Zalarian ship systems came back online in a cascade of light and energy. Quantum drives hummed to life, shields reformed, and communication systems reconnected with the galactic network. The impossible had been achieved. The journey back to Assembly Station was a triumph unlike anything the galaxy had seen. 400 Zalarian ships escorted by 40 human vessels that looked like they'd been through a war. Hull plates were missing. Cables still hung between ships like primitive umbilicals, and several human vessels were literally held together by mechanical patches and determination. When they arrived, the entire galactic assembly was waiting. As the fleet approached, something unprecedented happened. Every ship from every species activated their illumination arrays in salute. It was a gesture reserved for the greatest heroes of galactic civilization, and it was being offered to the newest, most primitive members of their community. Ambassador Korthax himself met Diana as she disembarked from the Magellan. The crystalline being's form glowed with what she had learned was profound respect. Captain Okonkwo, you have achieved what our most advanced technology could not. How? Diana looked back at her battered ship, at her exhausted but proud crew, at the cables and mechanical parts that had saved 20,000 lives. We never forgot that space doesn't care about your technology level. It only cares about what works. Sometimes, Ambassador, the old ways are the best ways. We just never forgot how to use them. The Primarch's voice resonated across the station. Let it be recorded that humanity has earned its place not through advanced technology, but through something far more valuable. Ingenuity, courage, and the wisdom to know that progress doesn't mean abandoning what works. The galaxy has much to learn from our newest members. As the crowd erupted in celebration, Diana found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. Humanity had reached for the stars with chemical rockets and slide rules, had built their first stations with steel and determination. They'd been called primitive by species that had forgotten their own origins, dismissed as backwards by civilizations that had become too dependent on their technology. But today, in the swirling chaos of the void sector, being primitive had been their greatest strength. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. They weren't the most advanced species, but they might just be the most versatile, the most stubborn, and the most willing to get their hands dirty when lives were on the line. The age of human involvement in galactic affairs had truly begun, and it had started not with quantum leaps or technological marvels, but with steel cables, chemical rockets, and the unshakable belief that no problem was truly impossible if you had enough duct tape and determination.